Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Eurogamer Newscast. This week, talking about game monetization and how publishers get your money after a game launches. Joining me as ever is Eurogamer's news team. We've got Ed Nightingale.
Hello.
Victoria Kennedy.
Hello.
And I'm Tom Phillips. And yeah, this week we've had a few post-launch monetization practices, and by that I mean things like battle passes, come into the headlines. Concord, which recently had a beta test, has come out and said that it won't have a battle pass. We've also had the creator of Stardew Valley saying they're never going to charge for more content after the game's launched. And we've also had Apex Legends and the controversy towards its changes to its battle pass slightly roll back what it's doing. And I think that this all sort of is part of a wider conversation, which is video games are getting more expensive to make. And all video game publishers want their games to last longer, be played for more time, and ultimately earn more money over time. And publishers are still trying to work out the best strategy to encourage you to play and to encourage you to play. Let's start with Concord. Ed, I can't remember if you wrote about this one this week or not, but what exactly is going on? There's been a beta test recently. How did that go?
There has. There was I think it was like a closed alpha first, which was only for PS Plus subscribers, and then there's been another beta since then. And I think player numbers have actually dropped, even though the beta has become more open, and which is maybe not such a good sign. And I think maybe Sony are a little worried about that. And that's maybe partly why they've now released the news that you will buy the game up front and there won't be a battle pass. And that's kind of going against typical practice, at least for that sort of hero shooter. It feels quite old school to me, which is strange to say in 2024, but you buy a game and then you get the game and then that's that. Like, that seems odd to say that. But so many games these days, especially in that sort of shooter category, tend to be free to play with a battle pass. And they've decided not to do that. And I think that sort of brings up the question of, is that the right move? Because on the one hand, I sort of like the idea that, you know, you buy a game and you get it, and that's that. But as you say, you want people to keep playing it. You want to try and monetize that. Does the lack of a battle pass hurt them in the long term? Now, had they released free to play, then you'd need a battle pass, or need, in inverted commas, a battle pass to have some sort of monetization. It feels like developers seem to do one or the other, and having both is an absolute no-no.
Yeah.
Which I think is what Suicide Squad did, where you bought the game, but then there was still a battle pass with it, which I think seemed to have put people off that game.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, definitely.
I think with Concord, what's interesting with that one though, so you were right that PS Plus users got to go onto the first beta, but originally that was actually only going to be for those who pre-ordered it, and then it was just I think 2 or 3 days before they said actually we're going to open it up to all PS Plus users, and so that in itself made me wonder, they obviously don't have that many pre-orders to make the beta worth going ahead with in its current iteration, so that's when they open it up to the PS Plus, and then the following weekend they opened it up to the wider public.
Equally, I feel like there's been not very much press on it in general. It wasn't announced that long ago. We didn't know much about it, and it's suddenly like, oh, come and pre-order it. It's like, well, no, I don't know what it is, so why would I pre-order it?
It had quite a funky cinematic trailer, but yes, I know what you mean. But then I think given that they had to sort of, you know, introduce the PS Plus users to this beta, and now they're saying, okay, actually, no, we're not going to have a battle pass, which I don't know what their stance was originally going to be. It does make it feel that they are trying to sort of do a lot of good service to sort of get some favor for the game right now.
I think that hesitation about what it's going to be and how it's going to play speaks to, you know, the fatigue around a lot of live service shooters right now. There are so many of them. If you want to play a live service shooter, you probably are already.
Yeah.
Maybe this one is better. Maybe this one is more attuned to you. But when people are so ingrained in some of the live services that are out there, Apex, Warzone, Fortnite, you know, it takes a lot for people to even want to dip their toe in the water. And I think that putting a beta behind a pre-order might sound like a good way to raise pre-orders, but why would people pre-order if they
Mhm.
haven't played it?
Yeah.
And I think they sort of realized they got that one back to front. Now, do we think that they were originally going to try and do a battle pass model for this? I don't know. I would suggest like the timing of the announcement this week on that is probably a way to encourage positive sentiment to the game at a point where people seem, a little ho hum about the beta. I would guess that they probably weren't going to do a battle pass anyway, but we don't know, to answer your question, Victoria. They hadn't said like
Mhm.
exactly how it was going to be. They hadn't ruled it out.
Yeah.
And you referenced Suicide Squad, Ed. Yeah, absolutely. That was a major point of contention prior to the game coming out, especially because it was Rocksteady. Rocksteady, a well-known single-player game developer, did the Arkham trilogy, and then that screenshot leaked of the menu, and there was a battle pass on it. And you also said this, like it's that combination of paying up front and having a battle pass that is really a bad move, I think, for a lot of people. That seems to be the point of view of folks out there, and that's, if I had to guess, that's why I think like Concord probably wasn't doing that anyway.
Mhm.
But they waited a while to say it, and they could have said it up front, and that might have then encouraged some of those pre-orders that they were waiting for
That's true. Yeah,
to get people
possibly.
into the beta.
I feel like we have a precedence now of live service games being free to play and having a battle pass. And with Concord, it feels like it is a live service game in a lot of ways, but you're paying for it up front. And that almost feels like, oh, we're doing, fan service that you don't have to, pay for all this time. You just pay up front and then you're good to go. But equally, I think people have got into this rhythm now of, well, then why would I pay up front for it when there are other games that are probably quite similar that are free, essentially? Why should I pay up front for this? And I
Mhm.
don't feel like, I mean, I haven't played the beta, but from the reaction of it, it seems like it is very similar to other games. And I don't feel like there's enough of a reason for people to want to pay up front. In which case, I feel like they should have gone the other way, maybe, of just following everyone else, making it free to play, but having a battle pass in order to monetize it long term. Maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the general consensus that I've seen is it's very Overwatch, and maybe that's a better, thing to suggest than some of the other games that I mentioned earlier. But of course, Overwatch is free to play,
Mhm.
and I'd be really interested to know, or to have been a fly on the wall of some of those discussions within Sony of how are we going to monetize this game? How are we going to pitch it?
It's
Do we
interesting
want
you
to?
mention Overwatch there, because even Overwatch 2 didn't do as well as Overwatch because people already had Overwatch. That was the game that they were playing and wanted to play. And I remember Overwatch 2 when it came out was not middlingly received, maybe because they didn't need a sequel.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is because there wasn't enough of a change to make the difference between Overwatch 1 and 2. And so then suddenly almost the same or very similar game to what people have already bought was suddenly free, which is not great. Like, if you're
Yeah.
going to do that, you need to make it substantially different, I think.
Yeah.
Or just make your existing game free somehow.
Sims did that.
I guess what you could say with Concord, and maybe we're being a little too hasty on it, but plenty of other people are being on the internet anyway. I would just say that launching it at a price, I don't think it's full price. It's not $70. I think it's about 40.
I think it was 40. Yeah.
Does then give you the option later on to go free to play. You do something for the people who did pay up front. You give them a bunch of cosmetics or whatever, and then you go the free to play option down the line. And maybe I'm sure that they're planning for this game to be around for at least a few years.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's an option then that they've got in their back pocket.
I mean,
Get that little bump up front, but
they have mentioned that there will be more free gunners, which are like the playable characters, and coming, along further down the line. So this is obviously is a game that they want to invest in for, future development and future
I think
content.
as well, like if you have something where you pay up front, it's like, this is the game, this is what we're doing, then you can have an experience that is tightly balanced between all the different characters, and you've got your content sorted, and that's that. And the problem with the battle pass is that you have to then keep making more battle passes, which means you have to keep making more content, and that means dragging out, okay, well, now we need to have more characters, we need more skins, we need more this, more that, and suddenly you're committing, therefore, to having to create all of this stuff. And I think if you're Epic and you've got loads of money for Fortnite and you can have all these different franchises and series coming in, then you've got tons of content. But if you're, making Concord, then suddenly you've got to get very creative, and not to say that they're not capable of doing that, but your confines are smaller in order to come up with more content over a long period of time, which is maybe quite tricky to commit to, and something that I think Fortnite does do very well. I mean, Tom, you're the Fortnite expert of the three of us. Like, that's obviously a very successful game and has a very successful battle pass.
Yeah, they really front load the battle pass with content that kind of makes it a must-have. I don't love all of how they do that because it's very FOMO based. Like, if you did not buy a battle pass last year, you will not have Darth Vader, and you will never get Darth Vader. Now, that's not entirely true because they do re-release new versions of skins. They don't re-release, they have done multiple versions of different skins in the past. So actually, a good example is like 3-ish years ago, they put Deadpool in a battle pass. And with the upcoming Deadpool Wolverine film coming out, they are going to sell a different Deadpool skin. But very much so, it's based on, like, if you didn't buy the battle pass last Christmas, you didn't get Peter Griffin. Kind of unlikely that they're going to resell a different version of Peter Griffin in the future. So that was your one shot at doing it. But it is stuffed with content. Fortnite is one of these games that's just, so huge that they can... Maybe the best example of a game that's so huge with a battle pass that they can get away with doing this stuff and make it just... an extremely valuable proposition in the eyes of gamers because they can collaborate with the biggest brands out there continuously, and they just stuff it full. But of course, Fortnite is a free-to-play game, that then also makes it, I think, for a lot of people, a very fair proposition. They give you in-game currency in the battle pass enough that you can then buy the next one. I know people who don't actually spend any money on Fortnite. They just earn out their battle pass, which includes enough in-game credits to then buy the next battle pass, and they're happy with those 6-7 skins that you get over the course of those 3 months, and that's it. Now, of course, most people don't do that. You just need to go into any Fortnite lobby and you see everybody wearing skins that you can only wear in the item shop, and you wonder, well, how much money have you spent on that? And we're not going to get into how much money I've spent on Fortnite, but they certainly have that down to a T. But that's a free-to-play game, which is different to Concord, different to Suicide Squad.
Yeah, it seems like that's what Apex is most emulating, and that's been part of the drama with it, right? Is that you now can, or they've changed it back so that you can earn the in-game currency to buy the next battle pass.
Yes, which was so. I can quickly run through the changes for anyone not aware this week, or over the last sort of weekish. They made a bunch of changes to the battle pass system. They're basically selling 2 now over the same time period that they would have sold 1 previously, which means you're now paying twice the amount for battle passes over that same amount of time. And that hasn't been rolled back. That is still the case. They've said that they are making the battle passes better, but the fact remains, if you want to keep buying the latest battle pass, you're now going to be buying twice as many per year than you were previously. And then what they did roll back is that they'd also said, well, you can't buy this with in-game currency anymore. And that did get changed, which is good, but people still don't like the fact that to keep up with the game, you're going to need to spend twice as much. But yes, it is a free-to-play game. They have to make their money somewhere, somehow. And the option is always there to not buy the battle pass, I suppose. But I can see why people were annoyed, for sure.
Yeah, the fact you can just buy it in-game or with in-game currency, you know, does sort of not force you, but encourages you to at least complete the battle pass, and that gets you playing, and that ultimately is what they want. So in that sense, it works, and I can see why having that battle pass is a way to keep players, and that's something that I think might end up hurting Concord in the long term, because unless it can hit the ground running with enough players at the start, there's not enough reason for people to keep coming back and playing again and again.
So you're saying that it should have a battle pass to keep
If it were
people
free to
coming back?
play.
If it was free to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I'd love to be a fly on the wall where they would have talked about this stuff, like how best to retain players and get money from them, and why they didn't decide to go down that route. Was it to try and stand out as a game without a battle pass? Did they look at the Suicide Squad backlash and think, you know, people are all battle passed out, we don't want to do one, but that means we then have to charge $40 up front? Maybe. Going back to Concord, but the one thing I'm sort of a bit surprised about that they didn't do is make it part of PlayStation Plus, because we've seen real success there in the past with games that have launched into that. Just, you know, for a month, make it free, everybody gives it a go. So you start getting to know the characters.
Well, I don't know if Foam Stars would agree with you on
Foam
that.
Stars was not as well received.
Yeah,
okay, it doesn't work every single time. But
I mean, that had a battle pass which was incredibly expensive, and also outside of PS Plus you had to buy the game, so it wasn't free to play, but it was cheap.
It's not foolproof. I accept that.
Yeah. Helldivers 2, that's another game that was on PlayStation that you did pay for up front, and they had their premium war bonds which you could purchase, but they were also, you could earn them like sort of credits through the game.
Yeah, and they're sort of battle passy.
But that was another game. I think though, I mean, Helldivers had such a moment, especially at the start of this year, and I guess because it was so slapstick and silly. And so maybe if Concord does manage to capture that kind of energy, it might be more successful. I don't know. I don't know if Helldivers was a bit of a
good game up front.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. I mean, I will say I'm generally, I would like to buy a game and own it, and then that's me, rather than being, you know, free to play. And then like I've tried Fortnite, I've dipped in and out because it's free to play, but I've not committed to a battle pass. But I do feel like in that instance, you're kind of just buying what, you know, 10, 15 years ago would have just been an online multiplayer mode attached to a shooter, like with Halo or something. And you're just buying that. And it just feels now that the landscape has changed. Most games tend to be of that sort of shooting game, tend to be this live service free-to-play game with a battle pass model. And I think going against that at this point could be a risk.
Very different style of game, obviously, but Stardew Valley, that's more of the kind of game that you're talking about, Ed, where you're saying, I just want to buy a game and then I've got the game.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, I haven't really played much Stardew, but it is a very different kind of game. I think it's been updated a lot over time.
You can now
but
drink
from
mayonnaise.
My understanding, well, exactly, you can now guzzle some mayonnaise down. But my understanding of that is that it's been lots of little updates rather than like, here's a big chunk, in which case that feels more like the game is just slowly evolving as opposed to here is like a chunk of content that's worth paying for. Although the most recent update has been very big, it's still, I don't know, I think even just calling it like an update or a patch means that it doesn't have the same idea in my head as like a piece of DLC, even though it is downloadable content ultimately. Like DLC to me, and it implies that it's like an expansion or a big chunk of content.
That's going to be like
general
story
updates,
or something.
you're like, well, you're just adding to the game that I've played, and I'm happy to keep doing that for free.
Yeah, I was quite surprised actually when Concerned Ape did say that, you know, any future DLC would be free. Just because, like you said, updates and patches, I think it's just like improvements and tweaks and changes to the games. It's an evolving thing. But when you say DLC, in my mind, it's like new story content. And then I was thinking, you know, obviously we had Shadow of the Erd Tree DLC earlier this year, and that was basically a new game in itself. And if we had Phantom Liberty for Cyberpunk, and I think that's absolutely fair to ask people to buy those, even though they own the base game, because it is basically an add-on of almost like a game in itself. And I think that is fair game to ask for more money, even though people already have, Elden Ring, Cyberpunk, other base game elements.
I fully agree with that. Like Shadow of the Erdtree it stands on its own. Well, not entirely because it's obviously based on the base game, but it is its own separate little experience that is complete in itself. And the base game is also complete without the need for that. And that's what I don't like with DLC, is if there's something that is held back to try and make more money later. I feel like if there's some sort of story element or idea that's been scrapped, there's probably a good reason for that, and it probably doesn't need to be added in as DLC unless it's spun into it. I'm sure like Miquela's story was originally meant to be in the base game, and then they took it out because it didn't fit, and the base game is better for that. But if you can twist that into something that stands on its own, that is still a good 30 hours or so of experience. That is literally a game in itself. I am more than happy to pay for that. But if I don't know, Elden Ring added in some new costumes or something like that, for me, that's not. I mean, maybe they'd charge like £2 for it or something, but to me, that's not DLC I'd want to pay for. But a big chunk of story stuff, that's worthwhile as DLC. But that's also, I don't think that's not. I just said a lot of weird words. That I don't think is what Stardew Valley has done. It's not like here's a big chunk of separate story. It's just adding to the game in little ways. That feels like, especially when there's a really dedicated community to that game, that just feels like fan service. It just adds to the value of the base game, so more and more people will buy it.
Yeah, that's the big difference with Stardew, isn't it? That it's developed by one person, and that one person has made an awful lot of money off of that game already. And the community around that game, the modding scene, the goodwill towards them. I mean, everyone knows that it's solo developed because he makes no secret of that fact, and I think it works in the game's favor that is the case. And he can put out a statement like this, and maybe he's just doesn't really need many more money than the millions he's made from Stardew Valley already, or maybe he sees in the long run this is the better thing for the game for me to just make this pledge. And who knows how much more content is actually going to come for Stardew. One day he will actually have to release Haunted Chocolatier.
I was going to say his next game, which is,
and then that will have free DLC.
But yeah, it works for him to say this game is never going to have paid DLC because that creates positive sentiment towards it and supports his humble indie dev image.
I'm sure Sony execs were looking at that statement like, good for you.
Yeah, exactly. Which is not the case for Concord, which is made by a team of several hundred people and has a marketing budget and fancy offices and a bottom line because it's owned ultimately by Sony.
Yeah.
And those developers would like to be paid for their time appropriately.
Yes.
I mean, as they should be, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we could do an entire newscast on this, but just hearing you sort of talk about Stardew, and I was sort of going to ask the devil's advocate question: is it a live service game? What makes a live service game? How do you define that?
Ooh.
Well, it's live.
Yeah.
And it's providing a service. I think for me, it's like it's just one that is ongoing, and I think if you're, well, I was going to bring up Baldur's Gate, but then maybe that's sort of different. I mean, they've added a lot of updates to that, but it's not an evolving game. It still is a game that has a beginning, middle, and end. And they've added bits to it, but it's still a complete. Sorry, I just muted myself.
I was going to say, is that
me? Baldur's Gate is still like a complete experience, whereas a live service game is something that continues and you can add to it to add to the experience to make it go on for longer. So whether that is a shooting game that you add more content to, or something like Stardew that, because it's a sort of sim game, you can keep adding to it. And this is a slight sidetrack, but I feel like that's what Animal Crossing should have been, but it wasn't. And that's an interesting thing, because then that is an equivalent to Stardew, but then they paid for the DLC because it was a big chunk of here's a new thing, rather than adding lots of little bits to it.
Yeah.
So Baldur's Gate, when it's adding new content in for the Dark Urge playthrough to encourage you to, spend more time or do something differently, does that not count as a new ending?
I don't think
Kind
so.
of, but it's like it's a choice. So it's not like this is your experience that is fundamentally changing. It's like, well, it's an extra or just a different option.
I think a lot of it's also like what players expect going into it. And like you said, there is a beginning, middle, and an end. And I think so if you have a story or an idea of what it is going to be when you first purchase it, whereas live service, you don't know where it potentially could go. You haven't had that information.
Also, does early access means it counts as a live service because it's live, but it's early access? Like, that's different.
It's funny, isn't it? I do agree with you on Animal Crossing, though. And again, we could probably do an entire newscast on that. I feel like Nintendo launched that game in 2020, and all of its developers had to work through COVID to, get all of the updates sorted. So I'm sure plans didn't go exactly as they're going to. But you could definitely see the next version of Animal Crossing taking advantage of the possibilities open to Nintendo to make that game more of a live service than the last one was. I really wanted more regular, interesting things beyond just, it's Tree Day again because it's April the 12th. I wanted, to turn on Animal Crossing and Isabel be like, hey, it's Splatfest this weekend. Have a Inkling chair or something like that. Or, them to add in actual, cool events and things that you could... I'm not saying I want Animal Crossing to have a battle pass. That is the kind of game that I'm very happy to pay $70 for up front and then just get a year's worth of cool stuff. In the end, Nintendo did that one big update about 18 months afterwards and then said, that's it, we're done.
But that was paid.
Which was paid.
I mean,
but also it was tied into Nintendo Online.
Nintendo Online.
If you got that, you got it for free.
Yeah.
But then not a lot has been added to that anyway. So apart from Splatoon and Animal Crossing, you're not getting too much from that. I think people realised that with Animal Crossing after a year, that, now it's just repeating. And I think people started to drop off at that point. And it was so popular that it could have easily kept going had they kept it on as a live service.
I mean,
and that's where I
they
think a
didn't
live service can
anticipate.
be a good thing, but it really depends on the type of game.
With Animal Crossing, though, that was very much a timing thing. I'm sure they didn't anticipate it being as popular as it did become. And maybe if they had...
Well, they should have adapted, but then this is Nintendo and they're far too slow. So.
Maybe if they had realised that, they would have had more live service style agenda in mind. But yes, the timing of that was fortuitous for their sales.
They still put together an entire DLC afterwards, which they could have split up into maybe 3 or 4 smaller updates and done them for free.
At least. Yeah. Yeah, they just dumped all that at once.
Is it Brewster's Roost they added? Yeah. Coffee shop.
The coffee thing.
Yeah.
I'm guessing Animal Crossing will be one of the earlier games in Switch 2's life. They will want to crack that one pretty soon because it is evergreen, and the sooner you put it out, the longer the tail it will have. And it's been a while. It's weird to think, but it's been 4 years.
It's been 4 years.
So.
Oh God, that went quick.
Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of things that went quick, that's a good place to leave it before we argue some more about battle passes. Thanks if you've made it this far. If you've been watching, listening, it's much appreciated. We'll be back very soon to discuss whatever is happening in the games industry then. Until then, Ed, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me at ed_knights.
And Victoria.
I am at Little Chop Shop Gal.
I am at Tom Phillips EG. Thanks everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
See you then.
Bye.